On today's podcast, we're diving into the topic of designing for differences in the way different people learn and develop within our organizations. The leaders and organizations that can design for different styles of learning and thinking will help their people and purpose reach new heights. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everybody, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today, welcome back. So glad you are here. We are in season 7. I still can't believe that. We're well over 160 episodes and climbing each week. And so if you are new to the podcast, I invite you to go back, listen to older episodes that are as relevant as ever, topics and interviews and chats that I've been lucky to have with thought leaders from around the world. Great stuff. And actually, if you are one of the OGs, you're one of the folks that have been with us from the very beginning of the podcast, I also invite you to go back and listen to these, because to be reminded of and refreshed on some of these topics that are truly as relevant as ever will be hopefully valuable to you. So thanks again for being a part of today. My commitment to you is that this is going to be a place for you to step back, to think, hopefully to be filled with some positive mojo and help you think about your life, how you show up, and certainly the culture that you're trying to create with the people in your life and your work. Before we dive into today's topic, if you will do me the favor, though, and you will rate the podcast, 5 stars, of course. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe already. But rate the podcast 5 stars. If you'll leave an authentic review, meaning your own words about why this is relevant and important in the world today, or just positive in the midst of a very noisy world, that helps people find it and helps the messages amplify. And then lastly, of course, anybody that shares it with their colleagues or team members or says, hey, on social media or wherever it is that you share it with people, that you say, hey, this is a topic that we ought to talk about or ought to be on our radar. Thanks to anybody who does that, because that's how it spreads, and we want these messages to reach as far as and make an impact to anybody that listens. So thanks to everybody that does that. A few podcasts ago, I shared about Fast Company's 4 leadership trends for this year, and I shared my initial reactions and observations to the list. We got a good response from that and an invitation to dive deeper into each of them. So we're doing a little 4-part series, some little micro pods, if you will, where I'm going to be diving into each of these 4 trends just on individual episodes that they've identified and providing some tips, but also some observations and just reactions to them in more detail. So we've already done the first one, which is workplace well-being. And we did the last episode, which was focusing on psychological safety. And today we'll dive into the topic for today. So on today's podcast, we're diving into the topic of designing for differences in the way different people learn and develop within our organizations. The leaders and organizations that can design for different styles of learning and thinking will help their people and purpose reach new heights. But before we dive into today's topic, let's pause for a second, take a quick break, and we'll be right back. If you haven't done so already, we hope you'll visit Amazon or Amplify or jasonvbarger.com to check out Breathing Oxygen, my new book that is all about breathing good oxygen into ourselves and mindsets that fuel ourselves and the teams and the organizations around us. Positive, healthy thinking is as essential to great leadership and building a winning culture as the air we breathe. Leading yourself and a team of people has never been more complicated than it is today. As a leader, every move you make is either breathing life into your organization or slowly killing it. The atmosphere can easily turn toxic with negativity, blame, and doubt poisoning the culture. Just like every being on the planet needs good air to breathe, every organization needs leadership that breathes life into its people to sustain the energy required to complete its mission. Breathing Oxygen focuses on 6 key leadership mindsets that breathe life into any team: clarity, inclusivity, mental agility, grit, rest, and ownership. Join us, read, and share Breathing Oxygen.
Available now from Amplify Books on Amazon and jasonvbarger.com.
So the 4 leadership trends that Fast Company identified for this year, again, the first one, your workplace is on the hook for well-being, is what they called it. I've dove into that in a previous episode. The second one, which we just did last week, is it's time to focus on a new kind of safety. And we dove into this idea of what does psychological safety really look like. And then today we're going to talk about don't just respect differences, design for them. And then lastly, next week, we'll talk about we're all still in recovery, and we'll define what we mean by that. So I'm going to share some thoughts, some tips, some observations that I have. And today we're focusing on that third one as a part of this series, which Fast Company just called Don't Just Respect Differences, Design for Them. So most organizational people strategies, so companies and leaders and teams that have these kind of people strategies, they're built on the idea that employees are relatively the same when it comes to how they see the world or what motivates them. Now, there are many generalities. There are many, certainly, similarities that we can point to. And certainly in the world today, we know that people want more meaningful culture and they want to be developed and they want a mission and a purpose greater than self. So we know that there are some generalities and some things that are similar between, almost all employees. But yet, neuroscience also shows us that every person's brain processes the world uniquely. So even identical twins can have radically different neurological responses to the same experience, which is fascinating, right? Identical twins, can have a radically different neurological response to the exact same experience. That's because while our genes determine how our brain is largely organized and where our neurons should be placed, environments and experience throughout life shapes how they act. So the result is that no two brains are exactly alike. The broad term for this is called neurodiversity. Neurodiversity. This is sounding really scientific and smart at this point, I'm guessing. But this is the term for it, neurodiversity. While neurodiversity can also refer to people with significantly different cognitive abilities, such as folks who might be on the autism spectrum, and we don't want to downplay the importance of accessibility for people with different needs. Absolutely, we do, and certainly that's one of the many organizations that I've cared about and partnered with over the years are really helping people that have different learning needs and different styles, but we're not just talking about just those folks, although those people are really important and worthy of us thinking about. But there's a bigger issue that's relevant to every company and every employee, and that's the fact that not just people that might show up on the autism spectrum, but every human, everyone's brain processes information differently. So in a workplace setting, understanding and accepting neurodiversity has huge implications across a variety of organizational practices, from the way that we recruit people to the way that we do hiring and onboarding of new people to performance reviews and just our day-to-day communication. That's why it's incumbent for organizations to respect cognitive differences and ensure their ways of working are accessible to everyone's mind. If we only have one way that we do it, then we're going to turn off and turn away from all these different people that come with neurodiversity, come to it from a slightly different perspective, that they won't be able to access it as well. And yet we want greater amounts of people to be able to bring their gifts and contribute. So one way to do this is to weave in more autonomy into our processes. which, oh, by the way, I can go off on a longer tangent about that's the way that our world is progressively becoming more wired, is autonomy and helping people make choices and find their own experience. So really what we're talking about today is helping to bring that kind of mindset to the way that we, attract, hire, onboard, etc., throughout our organizations. So take onboarding for an example. Some people might do best by reading documents for 5 days straight. I don't know who they are. I do know who they are. There are many analytical, deliberative folks, input people that their brains work that way. I know for me, that's not the way that I would want it. But for some people, that is the way that their brain works. So for onboarding, they may do great with reading documents for 5 days straight before they interact with people, while others might want to meet with a mentor once a week or have as many conversations with teammates as possible and to see and hear the concepts, orally, rather than having the same process for everyone or guessing what people might need. We have the opportunity to give people options. And again, I know that in some organizations, this requires more work. This requires more thinking. This requires us changing the way we've always done it. But I wonder if our approach to neurodiversity would begin to help us think about how can we give people options based on the way their brains work best, the way they learn best. And so that by giving people options, we're allowing them to choose one that suits the way their brain works best. Consider it a form of kind of a choose your own adventure, if you will. If you remember those books, I remember reading those as a kid, where you got to kind of pick the path of the adventure to ensure all kinds of brains can engage just the way they need to. The key, of course, is to have a strategy for those onboarding checkpoints. What are going to be the guideposts along the way, et cetera. So in this kind of thinking around neurodiversity and just inviting us to step back and think about the options and the paths that we may provide in terms of our people strategies with the people on our teams or throughout our organizations, a couple of tips or a couple of observations I would have would be this. One is to test it. And what I mean, and I've been a part of this in some organizations and then or watched it, witnessed it in others, and certainly observed this trend more, is that we know that some places in the interviewing and hiring stages, they establish tests and personality assessments and questions to better understand, somebody's personality profile, what their strengths are, what their learning styles, of this new team member might be. And in that assessment phase and testing, we start to become better aware of, and we are able as an organization to be more emotionally intelligent, not only to who is this person, and oh, by the way, they're also feeling out what kind of organization that they're and culture that they're stepping into it. That's a two-way partnership. But we start to realize in more depth what kind of environment they enjoy. What kind of environment for their learning style will they most thrive in? How do they best learn, and how do they best collaborate? We need to test it. We need to seek out this information. We need to ask it, and we have an opportunity to try to better understand their profile of how they think, learn, and interact from the very beginning. And oh, by the way, even for the people that have been there for 30 years, it might not be a bad thing to think about, are we just repeating the same patterns, or is there a way to honor this kind of neurodiversity and bring out the best in people based on their own thinking and learning styles? So the first thing is we need to test it or assess it. The next thing is we've got to actually chart a course. So once we are aware of those things and acknowledge the different neurodiversity, then to chart a course, which means with your new employee or with your team members or throughout your organization to step back and to then create the onboarding strategy based on their learning style that takes all of that into account and establishes learning guideposts for day one. Again, back to day one is if their learning style is very input-driven, deliberative, analytical, they may want to read documents and really sit in the information on day one. Somebody else may overwhelm them. That may not be the way that they're going to, even retain the information. So they may need to interact with more people and hear the content in storytelling. So are we charting a course that establishes a learning guidepost for day 1, day 30, day 90, day 180? What's going to happen at their 1-year anniversary? And are we going to be strategic enough to chart that course? How could their ongoing onboarding development be unique to them and their brain? Now, hear me clearly say that I'm not meaning that if you are a 5,000 employee organization or bigger or smaller, that you have to have 5,000 individual courses. But at the same time, there might be we know that there are consistent messages and alignment that everyone needs to have. If you've been a part of anything that I've done talking about onboarding, or if I've partnered with your organization, then I believe in how powerful consistent messaging and aligning around language is so important. And so there are going to be messages and alignment that needs to happen for everyone. But then, in addition to that, it's not a one-size-fits-all mentality. Then can we get strategic about a few different paths that may be based on the neurodiversity and the types of thinking and collaborating that people naturally bring to the table? So what are the options or the courses that the paths that we are going to develop to best meet people where they are and help them be as successful as they can be based on their learning style? The last tip I'll just share with you is debrief and adjust. So once you test it and assess it and you chart a course and you provide options and you begin to go down that path together, make sure you spend time debriefing, stepping back to debrief and adjust, which means step back and talk about it with them along the way. How's it going? What adjustments could be made? What has worked well and what would be more helpful? The course and the development doesn't stop at the 1-year anniversary, of course. In fact, the development path never stops. So all along the way, they are an active participant in their own learning. We are an active participant in supporting their learning and providing those options and pathways. And together, the paths and the development gets even richer as we go along. We learn more and we continue to debrief and adjust and make it stronger along the way for the next person that might be the right one to come down that path. So my last observation that I'll share with today is about all of the different trends, relates to all of them. And it's what I would say is, if you didn't think developing leaders and culture was important before the pandemic, before 2020, you now do, or you should. And over the last couple years, organizations are realizing that if you don't have a strategy about how you're developing people and culture and clarity of mission, vision, values, and re-engaging your workforce to think creatively and differently, if you're just crossing your fingers and kind of hoping that your people and your culture develop in the ways you want, then you're going to be behind. In fact, I'd say you're probably not going to last. The best places are the ones that are designing intentionally, they are connected, purposeful, and they are leading their way into the newly created future, that future culture that they're trying to create. So I hope today's episode got you thinking in some new ways. If a deeper dive into any of these topics is interesting to you, please reach out to us. Email at info@jasonvbarger.com and let us know. We'll continue to try to design content to help meet you where you are. Lastly, I hope you will go back and listen to old episodes or search up in the archives relevant topics that are still important for today. Cheers to the path ahead of us in the year ahead. Remember that the future of leadership is you, is me, is us. We need to get clear on the temperature we hope to set, and then be courageous and committed to breathing oxygen into the mindsets and actions that will sustain us on our path forward. Step back. Remember, be a thermostat. Breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.